So, hey, this is Matt Lachlan, and I'm thrilled to sit down with Genavive and Cameron Edman. They're friends of mine here in town that I've had the privilege to get to know better over the last year and a half. And the more I've gotten to know them, the more I just admire them. And I really think they're a beautiful family, a beautiful couple, and they radiate something out to the world that I'm just grateful to be around. So I'm thankful for the two of you being here today. We're talking about a profound loss that Cameron and Genevieve experienced together as a couple, the loss of their son, Clark Job. And I think the best way to introduce that would be just, it's funny, I didn't even know about your story. I mean, I met you and saw you at church, and then Cameron and I would run into each other. It's a men's group that we attend, and but reflecting on the fact that you guys were coming in, it really struck me that people go through all kinds of things, and they don't necessarily broadcast it or talk about it in semi day-to-day life. It's like a private experience, and I was reminded of that. And my wife knew about your story, Genevieve, and she was the first one to direct me to your Genevieve and Cameron shared a Facebook photo album that really gives a pictorial of some of what they experienced in losing Clark Job. And all I could say is, like, you cannot look at those pictures or read what you wrote and just not weep. Like, just weep. And I knew you guys a bit, and I was it was simultaneously, I was incredibly moved by what, like, in an uplifting kind of way, but then like a heartbreak kind of, like the compassion that comes up. So why don't we start with, by way of an introduction, just for the listener, your son was diagnosed with acrania. Mm-hmm. So before we start there, let's talk about the birth of Gabriel and kind of a little bit about you two, and then take us to when you found out about what Clark Job had. So. Sure.
Yeah. Well, quick background on us. We both we met at Gonzaga University. We both went to school there, and got married a couple years after college, and pregnant. Gave birth to our first son, Gabriel, about a year after that. So we started our family pretty early, and then we're looking to have a big family. We like kids. We were raised that way. That's how we kind of wanted to do our life, and so at that point we got pregnant with our second son, Clark Job, and that's kind of where everything kind of turned for us a little bit. Life turned a lot, and we, and that's where our whole story, I guess, begins, is, after getting pregnant with him in 2015.
We had him in 2015.
Had him in 2015.
Yeah. I know, it's hard to remember.
That's what wives are for. Yeah, so.
I look over there. Yeah.
Well, and Gabriel was a pretty normal pregnancy and birth, and so I see those years as young and dumb in a good way, like full of just joy that didn't know death yet, and kind
young
of a carefreeness
couple,
about things.
Well, even you're almost alluding to your first personal encounter with the problem of suffering, profound suffering, and as a young couple, to experience it has certainly a majorly tragic element too. So you're kind of oblivious to that.
Yeah, we were. I think God kind of prepared our marriage because we didn't see eye to eye in faith 100%, and so we did spend our 2 years of dating trying to work this out, trying to work out how God works in our lives, and if we do need to be on agreement with everything, or if God really mattered in raising a family, all of these things. So we really, through dating, had to dive deep with that. And
that spiritual alignment in your marriage.
Yes.
Like, what is God to you? What is God to you?
Yeah.
To what? Say it. Yeah. Talk. Did you find before your wedding ceremony, was there a high degree of alignment and peace there, or was that a process? Or?
It was definitely a process. I was raised Protestant, faithfully for the most part, and Jenna raised Catholic, and we started dating kind of with the basics in line, and wanting to get through that, and then once it got serious, we kind of had to realize, all right, we've got to kind of align on some things here if we're going to move forward. Kind of maybe had a back sense that this wasn't going to work if we were separated on how we wanted to go about raising our kids and spirituality or how that wanted to go down. So we actually broke up several times when we were dating, just trying to make sure we were on the right path, as far as why we were doing what we were doing. And
was that, other than being young, it's sort of an individuation process and sorting yourself out and things, but were those breakups somewhat related to your faith alignment or
Pretty
or
much
not?
100%.
pretty much exclusively.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I was not adamant that we have the exact same faith.
Yeah.
But it had more to do with, are we both seeking the truth? And so that's kind of how dating was. There were different points for both of us where it was, I remember Cameron saying, well, that may be true. I just don't know if I could ever follow through on that for the persecution that would take place, that type of thing. And then I remember thinking, well, the further I look into this church difference, I was either losing faith or gaining it more so, for the Catholic Church. So we did. We went through a lot of that. And honestly, our faith is what gave us purpose to suffering, because the more you look into it, the more you see how the saints suffer and yet cling to God. And so I really think he was just preparing us to not give up on him, in those dark times.
Yeah, and I think I'll definitely swing to that, because I know you're both devout Catholics, and the Catholic faith seems to have a unique understanding of suffering, and it'd be interesting to hear how something abstract or maybe conceptual became very real for you. So just for the listeners' sake, you now have 4 children. Well,
Yes.
Three with you, and Clark Job's spirit
Yes.
is number 4. And so you had you resolved that. Did you come to a resolution before your wedding day? I mean, how it's probably been a faith journey is a life process.
It's a journey, sure, but as far as the alignment of faith, as far as that's concerned, we resolved that before we got engaged. Before we got married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got married. How old were you guys when you got married?
I was 21.
24
or 5.
4.
Yeah.
You were 4 or 5. I don't remember.
24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got married.
Young for today's standards.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're old souls though. So you had Gabriel pretty soon.
1 year later.
Yeah.
Almost
Almost
exactly.
to the day. Yeah.
And then when did you get pregnant with Clark Job?
Gabe was a little over a year, so we were trying to sort of space out every 2 years or so to give siblings until we get tired.
So it's spring of 2015, winter of 2015.
So tell us about when did you learn about Acrania, and tell us about that process for you. Yeah.
I was actually at an appointment on my own. Cameron was working, and I was 11 weeks along, which is very early, and they decided to do an ultrasound just for the sake of confirming pregnancy and making sure there's one baby, not 2 or 3,
Yeah, you're
just very practical.
Yeah.
Again, not expecting anything.
Yeah.
And they sent me home and didn't mention anything, but I got a phone call saying, you need to come in immediately. And I was so naive that I was like, oh, well, maybe we're going to do another ultrasound. It'll be fun,
Yeah.
So that they did tell me while I was alone, sadly, and Cameron was not there, that he was incompatible with life. And that was the biggest, kick to the gut, was learning that's even a thing. Yes.
They said,
yeah, your baby's incompatible with life. He's not going to make it no matter what we do. There you go.
Wow.
And the biggest thing was, it's okay. You're still really early. You can try again. And they were basically very, I guess the typical thing to do would to end the pregnancy.
The typical route, which is really what the courage of your choices in the face of that is what moved me to interview you. But yeah, so the typical culture, the typical thing was like, well, obviously an abortion is the next step here kind of thing. Like, and that's a good thing. And
it's just to spare you.
Yeah. It's like the mercy argument, right? It's mercy for the parents, mercy for the kid. In this case, they thought, And so a couple of things that stuck out in my mind with that whole discovery process was I actually remember it pretty distinctly. I was at home actually working on a paper. I was working on my master's at the time, and Jenna walked in the door, and immediately she said, "There's something wrong with our baby." And stood up and she collapsed in my arms, and we were, and I didn't know what was going on at the time, but she's crying, and then, you know, I started just not knowing what was going on. And once I found out, I was, you know, I don't remember what I thought at that point, but I just remember thinking, you know, what, it's just such like burned in your brain, you know, when something like that happens. So I'll never forget that. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting too is, you know, the point of being naive, like we've kind of mentioned there earlier, is when we were in that ultrasound initially, you know, we were all happy, we were smiling, giggling, and poking each other and stuff when we first saw the first ultrasound. And as we were driving home later, we're like, yeah, that nurse she must have been like tired or just must have worked a graveyard shift or something, you know, because she was just kind of out there. She was acting weird and kind of goofy and not really saying much, you know. And we at Gestation didn't know what was going on, didn't have any idea of anything. And looking at the ultrasound pictures later, we were like, oh, yeah, it's pretty obvious that's missing the top part of his head, you know, because you can, in ultrasounds, can really do a good job picking up, you know, hard matter, you know, and you just couldn't see it, where it's like, yeah, okay, we were just totally clueless, you know, just no idea.
For the listener, for context, a crania is without a skull.
Right.
And I remember reading in the article you shared that you wrote in a local periodical, that some babies can live a little bit, right, for some period of time, or some die in the birth process. But was that described to you at this point? Like the significance of going full term and...
I can't say that they never spoke past death, really. There was no, I mean, there may have been a time where the nurse said, you know, he may live a couple hours or something like that. But we faced a difficult meeting with a doctor and didn't go back afterwards, because he, after we said, you know, we've been raised pro-life, this is a human being. We just gave birth to our other son and saw what that means, you know, to carry a child, and especially as the mother and everything, I know that's a life, you know, and maybe that's why God gave us Gabriel first, you know, this healthy baby, to be able to realize, you know, who Clark was, also another human being, and our son, and all of this. So I just remember Cameron being, you know, my backbone, saying, no, we're not, we really just, we don't want to take the baby. We're, you know, this is where we're at. And the doctor kept kind of trying to bring it up again and again. Well, you've got time. You have till 24 weeks to decide, and that kind of thing. And then finally I kind of lost it as much as I can. I don't like confrontation, but I just said, you know what? We're all going to die. It finally hit me. And I was like, nothing guarantees that you or I outlive this child. We could die in a car wreck in an hour, you know? And so it just hit me that you're not planning your funeral, even with the knowledge that you will die. So don't force my kid into his early funeral. If it's not, you know, if he's fighting to be alive right now, then we're with him, and that's all we could do.
And quite healthy and pain-free at that point.
Honestly,
As a baby, he's laying in the womb like any other baby.
Yeah, and thankfully, you know, that's something that you, of course, are afraid of, that you might be causing suffering. You know, there have been accusations of that, but again, it was still, well, what's the alternative to, you know, to kill him early, you know, and that would cause pain. So again, pain, we had to let go of that.
Well, yeah, that you were faced with the baby would go through pain and suffering no matter the decision, potentially.
Right. Yeah. And so it was more like, well, we are on his team. So as long as he's fighting to be alive, then I will, you know, I planned on being fully pregnant and giving birth to a baby anyway, you know, and and again, we knew that was his life, and that was the time we were given. So why would we cut that short?
How did that? I'm trying to wrap my brain and my heart around like what the following months were like for you. You know, because you're pregnant, and the kind of conversations and the I don't know what that had to be a profound, long before you gave birth to him, like a profound reorienting in your spirit of life and
for sure.
Like what was that like?
Well, I'll speak from my perspective, not from first person here. You know, Jenny can speak to this probably better, but I just remember it being, and I've wrote about this before, and a couple of things I've written is that it's like it was most painful, like bittersweet, it embodied the essence of like bittersweet, right? It's like you knew it hurts. It's gonna hurt. We're gonna experience loss. We hadn't yet, but we knew it was going to happen. And but still, it's like we were still determined, probably by the grace of God, to be able to actually embrace what was happening and to live in it and to like embrace the suffering that we were feeling at the time. You know, even though we knew it wasn't even really the culmination of the suffering yet at that time. You know, it's just we were experiencing it day after day. You know, people told us, well, it probably would have been easier if you used, you know, for those who lose their babies without ever knowing something's wrong. And I was like, I can't speak to that, but it kind of had a point, because every day we were suffering, not just one time
you said
where
something.
the baby,
You said, you said we embrace the suffering. Like when we embrace the suffering, then like did you notice an inner like a strength to bear it, or because the basic, you know, like the Christian Catholic understanding, you embrace the suffering and somehow there's a grace or strength to bear it, right? Like what was that like? Did you feel that strength and grace, or was it what was?
I think so, and I think I mean, ironically, we look at the time when we were pregnant with him as a good time, you know. Yes, you wake up, you know, or you feel a kick, or you look in the mirror, or you get complimented by someone. Congratulations.
The beauty of being pregnant.
So you have that 24/7, and yet, you know, deep down, it was definitely a place of surrender, because there's nothing, you're told as a parent, there's nothing you can do. You're told that all the time. But, you know, again, it was like, well, do we really have much control outside of our yes to God anyway, you know? And so by saying yes, we did. There were moments where early on, especially, you know, when I started to feel him kick, a lot of times that would just make me sad, you know, because I felt like he was communicating with me, and yet there's nothing I could do to prepare him or tell him that I love him and all that, other than giving him life. And so in a way, our choosing life was, we can do something about this, and we can love him as we would any of our kids, you know? And so I look at the pregnancy actually fondly, and you know, some of the memories that we have.
It comes through in some of your the picture you shared on your album, like in the mirror to your pregnant belly, just the joy of it. You look happy.
That's like the paradox, I think, that the Christian faith and as a whole, I think the Catholic faith specifically presents, is through suffering we experience the most joy somehow, you know. And I don't fully understand that still, but I think we experience a little bit of that, and what that kind of means, being like poor in spirit and being so like devastated because, you know, our future plans, things that we had kind of planned out, or just death in general, you know, it hurts and it's hard. And somehow that like makes you appreciate life even more when you experience death. You know, it's kind of an odd paradox. And then, sure, we could have taken the easy route, you know, just end it, start over, try again, you know, like we were kind of told. But seeing the growth and like the closeness with God and each other, I think is the main thing. It's like we could have grown apart, we could have grown together, you know. And because a lot of families, I think the stat is like 90% or something of families who lose a child struggle at least in their marriages from then on, you know. I mean, and so like, it would have been probably easier to just end it, move on. But I mean, it would have missed out on the richness and the joy I think that God had for us through that, which is kind of strange that that's how it plays out, but that's how it is, and that's how it was for us.
And that, well, tell us about as the birth approached, like how did you what was that like?
We well, thankfully we were connected with a photographer right 2 days before we gave birth, and she had lost her daughter almost 10 years before to anencephaly, so very similar neural tube defect, and just the science behind it, you know. A lot of modern medicine teaches that the child is brain dead or lacks a brain stem. Again, justifying ending this and just not even looking into why this is a problem or how we could help it, you know. It's just a very highly aborted diagnosis, and so we know nothing about it. And again, as parents, you know, being faced with that, that was another reason to carry our baby, was like, well, can we get to know this better, you know, and spare other families or motivate them somehow. And if it hadn't been for the ultrasound, that pregnancy was the same as every pregnancy I've had. He reacted to the ultrasound pressure, he had hiccups. He would sleep, and wake when.
Yeah, you felt
like
the same yourself as a
Yes.
We
pregnant.
wouldn't have known any different if there wasn't ultrasound. Yeah.
And so again, that's why I don't know. I think that was consolation that if he's wanting to live and thrive the way he is, then we're supporting him in that. So leading up to the birth, there was just excitement to meet him, but honestly, dread too. Because again,
of course.
We had high hopes.
Did you just pray? I mean, did you pray more than you ever have in your life? I mean, where did you lean?
Yeah. Well, I just remember through the whole experience, like that was the closest I've ever personally felt to God, was through that. Again, strange how that works, but that's how it is. And leading up to the birth, I mean, it was almost like we were preparing. We're both athletes. We were like preparing for an event almost, or like a game, because we knew what was coming, and so we were trying to prepare our souls, prepare our hearts for what was going to go on by reading material and
working out,
watching videos. Working out the soul, I guess. But yeah, and so we did everything we possibly could leading up to that. We were ready, and we could. My personal prayer was that I would be there, be present, and embrace it, and embrace whatever happened, instead of checking out or being absent or
totally present to the experience. And
and that's not an easy thing to do. And for me, that was the challenge, because for everyone, I think you check out when things get hard.
Well, just a quote unquote healthy birth is such an intense,
right?
You mean you have similar considerations, being present and much less what you were looking at.
Yeah.
And what an incredible thing that the photographer had a compassionate, understanding.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I think it should be stated, like that Facebook album, you had no intention to share it with
no.
It was a private whatever. You just posted an album on Facebook to
yes. So
I'll how many thousand views? I mean,
I don't know views, but there's over 200,000 shares of the album.
200,000 people have shared it. Wow.
Yeah.
So, well, before we get there, because I'd love to hear that process and what that was like for you, and what kind of was born out of that in terms of your own sharing of your experience. But so the birth itself, did you have any family members present with you, or was it just the two of you? Or
the birth itself was just the two of us, and that's kind of how we've done it.
Yeah, same here with our family.
Yeah. And then our support group out, in the lobby praying and watching Big Brother Gabriel, because that was one thing, was that we prayerfully considered, how to introduce this sibling to our son Gabe, and he was one of the best things about it, because when he got to meet him,
his innocent joy. I hate to interrupt you. I get teary you can see in the photos, he was in pure joyful delight, like any older brother would be, putting his nose up to Clark Job, and
which is amazing, because Clark was deformed. I mean, bottom line, he was not a normal baby, and the first thing Gabe does goes, "Baby," and he goes and he saw his nose and his toes, and then he asked about his owie. Did
he say owie?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's got an owie, and he tried to kiss it.
He went in there and tried to kiss him to make it better.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Which is just again like the innocent love of a child, and we have those pictures forever. He has those pictures and those memories.
The radiance of the precious of life just radiates in it, looking at it.
Yeah, I think kids are less dulled by what the world thinks of life, or the brokenness, and he just saw love, and he saw his brother, another human being. So that was, talk about consolation as parents.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite memories.
What was it like for you to hold him?
It was raw. It was, again, a naivete that was taken away, and it has affected my heart, giving birth to other children too, staring death in the face like that, but also loving your child, So I can go right back to it any second. But to kiss him, and it still is a very difficult lack of answer to prayer, in the sense that I hoped to see him breathe or meet him alive. And honestly, it was probably 2 minutes that his heart gave out, 2 minutes before he was all the way out. Wow. And so again, I look at him like he is such a little stud, because it was a 16-hour labor and he lived all that time. Wow. And because I felt him, and I remember he gave me one big kick in the end, and I yelled that I loved him, and that's kind of my moment that I hope that he heard that, But again, so the beauty of faith is that I know that now he knows it more than we could have expressed then, but it's still a hard one to swallow.
Yeah, it's hard to even talk about that, I guess, that whole experience, because, you say it's not right for a kid to bury their child, that's just not, it's against the natural order of things. And even worse, I think, especially for the mom, to have an already deceased child handed up to her, having given birth, and it's, I don't know. It's a very difficult thing to even express, I guess, the sorrow and the pain, I guess, we felt during that time in the hospital there, and I just remember holding him and, again, trying to take in everything we could, looking at him and touching him and trying to experience, knowing we wouldn't have him with us at all the rest of life, and so this is the only 24 hours or whatever it was going to be of even just having his body, knowing his soul's not even present, and that in itself was something even more difficult to grasp. It's like, we're living his body that God gave him, but his soul is already with God. So in that sense,
it's triumphant in a way.
And so it's very unique experience.
And Cameron baptized him anyway, and we, we were given this time to prepare. So in a way, it was a gift, even though it was 9 months or almost 9 months of knowing this was going to happen. We were able to plan that his outfit would be, baptismal white and just this little saint, and to give meaning to literally everything that we did. So the birth process, as hard as it was, he stuck it out with us, which was amazing. And Cameron was right there with me and an amazing support. And then we got to bathe and dress him and give him to God, And so I can't think of a more respectful or holy way to love on him, I guess, when I think of what our alternatives had been,
Yeah, and that was part of it. And that was maybe what helped us too, is when they were giving us the alternatives of starting over, right? That almost being the competitive selves, we wanted to go the other direction and do everything we possibly could to enjoy him as much as possible, have no regrets. I think
on your
did
terms,
that as best as we could.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're you were faced with choices and options to go. You could walk a road of despair, bitterness, resentment. Not to say you didn't confront pain and suffering throughout it all. It strikes me how much you made a resolute decision to head in a certain direction with.
Yeah, I definitely have a more compassionate view for people who are faced with it and may not have the example or just the truth planted in them that we had, because I don't think that ending it early is the easier way out in the big picture.
Yeah, there's a consequence.
There's damage and consequence to both, but at least we can say this is beautiful and we don't have regret. Where I can imagine seeing something like this later, had I chosen differently, and wishing that I could have held him,
Yeah, so. Not to, step away into abstract land, but again, like earlier on this, we're talking about the problem of suffering and how what it is to you and how you surrender it, how you deal with it with your faith. And but yeah, that's striking the way you put that, because whatever, like a seemingly no-win option or an overwhelming scenario, in essence, in a way, you're saying it's always worth it to take the high road, the courageous road, the noble. You know what I mean? Like
and love, I guess.
Yeah, choose love. What would love?
Yeah. What does love look like? And a lot of times it does look harder.
It's the harder path.
Yeah. But ultimately, the pain of that path is justified by, I mean, love wins out, like, right? There's there's like, even, so maybe a segue here would be like, talk to us about, because your process around this and the way it impacted your having more children and your marriage, like post birth. What was the months after that like for you?
I thankfully kept being vulnerable and kept sharing some things, and but there are some that you can't, and there is a darkness that I still deal with, even now. So to say that you're not affected in negative ways, that would be a lie, because there are things and issues that we still have to work out or just live with, and I think many parents who have lost kids say it doesn't go away, and that's some of that darkness doesn't, because almost like waking up, being pregnant and knowing that your child's going to die, you wake up and you know that God has allowed children to die. So it's one of those, that's a dark place to start your faith every morning, but he allowed his own kid to die. And so again, it's that the paradox of love and knowing that this isn't it, that heaven is the biggest motivation and the biggest hope. And I couldn't do it without that. That's for sure.
It's such the if there's ever something that's going to stir you out of your like everydayness and your dullness of going through life and just kind of skating by, it's something like that, where it's some life shocking event, where you don't have any choice. You either embrace it and your eyes are opened in some form to, there's way more going on than what meets the eye, and God is way bigger than we can ever even understand. If he does allow children to die and things like this to happen to, what we like to think are decent human beings, then what's really going on? And when those questions aren't answered, they're really unanswerable in some ways. We can't really ever know exactly what that looks like. And so I think that's really where like faith takes the next step. And that was what we were faced with, I think, at that point, is grasping the fact that we were probably never, ever going to know really fully what this was for, why, or what the plan is and where it fits in the whole grand scheme of things. And that was, I think, what was difficult for me, at least personally, after the fact. And
we've been lucky enough to see his story in the world and making a difference, where I know many suffer loss without getting to see that. So in some ways, I think we have been lucky seeing that God is using
what a
life.
Blessing that not only you had the courage to take him to full term, but I mean, I just spoke with somebody today, and he was talking about, I won't share who he is, but locally he almost has lost his son multiple times to a certain condition. And we were just talking about life, and he referenced a podcast, a gentleman, a national figure, and the hope and courage this particular individual's just listening to him brought into his life. And that podcaster will never know that. Mm-hmm. And, the fact that 200,000 some people shared, and even I'm deeply affected by what you're saying. And and then I'm struck by, so that there's a solace or peace knowing that his saying yes to his life allowed a life to radiate forth at a level that you can't even comprehend in terms of the potential.
And that we'll probably never reach ourselves.
Yeah.
That's, how ironic.
Yeah, he didn't even, he was 2 minutes short of life, yet he'll probably in some sort of spiritual sense have a more pivotal impact, right? You could say.
Yeah, on us and the world.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah, he says that photo album that we posted on Facebook, more for friends and family, and
as an example,
so people can kind of walk through it with us if they chose to.
Yeah. So me not being techie, thought that public meant that, people that my parents were friends with who were praying for us, because word gets around. So I was getting friend requests from people I didn't know, but my parents knew. And so my thought had been, well, my parents can share this with them. And they
it's
are
like
able
early
to see
Facebook.
It.
No one knows.
Early Facebook
what
have
you were
no
doing.
idea what the viral stuff means or that.
And
honestly, I would never have posted it, and so maybe that's why I wasn't allowed to know.
It would have gone against just your probably sensibilities or something.
Yeah, exactly. It's very vulnerable, and it is. There's a graphic side to it. It's something I wouldn't want, just all over. But I think God had other plans, and I came to the point of about to delete the album.
I bet. Yeah.
About a week after it went viral, right before Christmas of 2015.
Wow.
Just organically, because I had posted it probably a month before that.
Yeah.
So, as I'm realizing, because our computers were freezing and my phone was freezing, and what's going on?
Wow.
And so I almost deleted it when I realized that from all over the world this was being seen.
Such an ultra private thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But honestly, for me, for one, every parent likes to talk about their kid that's gone. It's exceptional. It's a treat because you don't wear it out front.
Our first guest said that. It was like he delights in talking about a son he lost to cancer, but yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I didn't want to delete him, from who I am, because he was definitely, a huge part of that. But the other thing was just the mass reaction was, I've never seen love like this. And again, we know that the love that we gave him was all because God's love for us is so similar, I really, truly relate our son being so vulnerable and broken and small and silent to, what we have and all of our inabilities compared to God's. And yet God, loves us like a father. And so seeing that, I really think that that's why so many people love his story, or could relate. I was
going to ask you about that. What there's so identifying in a way people, grown men and women, parents can personally identify with it, like at the essence level of,
and I think it was essence because not many can actually relate to this. It's a very small 1 in 20,000 thing.
People are identifying with something, because you
Something
can't relate
bigger.
to it in an actual. I mean, we'd have to live a million lifetimes and go through a million sufferings but yet they identified with something.
And they did, which is, it's kind of odd because, like she said, there's not many people that go through this. Not that we'd ever want them to, and it's not like people may not fully understand what we went through, and that's good. We don't really want them to do that, but in some, like you said, in some form they related to it and it struck a chord. And I remember getting, we got message and friend requests and people from New Zealand and all over the China. I mean, it's where we got every continent or every
South
country.
Africa,
Yeah. It's weird how to spread it. I don't know how that ever happened, but so and even some of these messages were like, "Hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm trying to make this decision. I just need some help from me. I need some prayers, that kind of thing." And there was one point we were trying to go through all of them and try to like message people back, but it was like there's so many.
You can't do that.
Yeah, it was really interesting how that went down.
What you said something earlier, Genevieve, that relates to what we're talking about now. You said, I don't know how you put it, but the perspective in going through the loss of Clark Job and what matters most, and you said heaven. And I'd like you to elaborate on that, because I mean, some of our listeners are going to be Christian, some are Catholic, some are agnostic, but there's something in that I think people in and outside of faith could relate to, like in a way you're saying life far transcends this one. It's eternal, and you believe that, you take that on faith and experientially, and elaborate more on that rather than just what do you mean by that?
Well, it's especially when a baby dies, that child hasn't lived, if this is all that matters, or if this is all that life is, and babies can be brought about and then die before ever experiencing it. I mean, that's the biggest void to me, the darkest void, It's
like a nihilistic, meaningless.
Very,
we're talking about meaning and significance.
So there's that, but I don't choose to hope in heaven because that's the only happy alternative.
Or like to escape today or
Right.
something.
No.
Yeah.
Again, I still go back and forth sometimes wondering, because the world is full of suffering and we know, a tiny slice of it compared to many. So suffering is very real and darkness is very real. But
did you name him Job for that reason?
Yes.
Because Job, a favorite Swiss psychoanalyst of mine, Carl Jung, has this great essay on the problem of suffering and Job's answer to it. And it's really from a kind of a psycho-spiritual perspective.
Sounds good.
Yeah. But Job, did that inspire us to speak to that? Like,
Job is sort of I would term the saint of suffering, because he lost everything that did matter to him and all hope, and he was also honest with God. If you listen to the dialogue, he didn't play it up and say, oh, but everything's great. And
psychologically, some people call that a spiritual bypass, where it's really a denial or a total suppression of what you're really experiencing. But he was forthright,
very,
and like, what's going on with me? Right? Yeah.
So and on his tombstone, on Clark Job's tombstone, it refers to Job 121, which is naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I'm trying to remember.
Return.
I know, return.
That's
Blessed
moving.
be the name of the Lord. I'm sorry that I'm not remembering it verbatim. But basically, I come into the world with nothing. I leave the world with nothing, but blessed be the name of the Lord.
Regardless of what happens
and that
in
was,
between.
And that is his life, and that is our prayer, And again, I would say the example of Job and the example of many people who died in suffering but said, blessed be God. That's further support for
that
hope.
That's a high level, like, I'm reading I love this book, Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, like a 17th century Catholic monk. But he talked about at one point in his writings, he was in torment, but he made a resolution to do all for the love of God, no matter the scenario or circumstance. So whatever suffering he was going through, whatever joys, there's something transcendent, and even the scriptural I had no idea.
Yeah, and scripture was a huge support to us, because very important dates all seem to align. God gave us the readings for the day type of thing, and when we found out about Clark's diagnosis, it was Good Friday. And the readings for Good Friday are when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and says, let this pass, I don't want this suffering if it's
take
your
this
will.
Cup from me if it be your will.
But your will be done.
Your will, it's the same.
So God again provided that. That was our.
And that's what you read
juice.
on the Friday of
the day that we found out of his diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
And there were other
really?
Yes.
Wow.
And get this. This is a Catholic, this was a Catholic like kiss from God, but still, the only day that my doctor could induce him at full term when he was in town, and all of these scheduling and Cameron being off, was Our Lady of Sorrows, the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows, where again God is giving someone to console us. Someone else has been here before, and it's him. It's Mary, it's Jesus, and God who have lost a child.
And that's what. For just context, from the perspective of a saint, one of the functions they serve is to inspire us to bear, do, or. And then you referenced earlier the 121. Is that the scriptural verse, or
yes.
what is it?
Yeah, Job 1 verse 21.
Job 1 verse 20. Or Job 1:21.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's on his tombstone, and then the other thing is enjoy the banquet. Born to heaven type of
the
thing.
heavenly banquet. Yeah.
So we do I think we have more ammo than just hopeful, thoughts.
Yeah, well, exactly. I want to ask you about that, because and again, this is a question for some people. Some people, it's like the practical experience of one's faith and confirmations, inner knowingness.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like this isn't an abstraction for you. This is what's most dear to you in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it sounds like you had a lot of inner awarenesses or confirmations that supported you throughout it. Yeah. Does that talk to us about that? Like,
for me, it had a lot to do with just being fed the scripture readings. Like I said, those were moments. I think children have a good sense of that there's more, and so again, living life in joy with my kids and the way that they speak of heaven and how real it is. The communion of saints and learning that we can, ask our friends in heaven for help and they can pray for us and all of that. Again, it just connects.
Like a familial kind of.
It does. And again, I think God has been silent to me in a lot of ways. Some people experience God's voice just clear, right?
Yeah.
But I relate more to the Mother Teresa type where sometimes it feels very silent, when you would hope for more consolation or something. But
and so many of the saints advise against being attached to or seeking consolation. Like you read their writings and they're like,
and so the more you seek it,
you do it for the for the love of the Lord Jesus Christ, and don't seek any consolation from him or something. But of course we want confirmation. Like going through your experience, it's interesting. So you.
So we have that, and then just people appreciating the love that's shown in his life and the way we loved him. That was so not by our own strength, And I think that is something to cling to as well, because
the support of the group of people in your life, or like
I'm meaning grace. Even I just think that the reality of grace and saying if I had looked at that beforehand, I'd say I would never be able to do that. Never.
Yeah.
I'd never be able to smile at my kid's funeral, and yet it was there. God somehow, provided
like you could your spirit can bear much more than you realize with the grace and strength of God. Like, like are you? That's something that was a whole kind of thread. A gentleman I interviewed not long ago, but he losing his son, and he said he was just shocked at the love lifted him. Like he was shocked and looking. It was like shocking what he saw he could bear.
Yes, out of love, definitely.
Yeah, out of love, and you experience it as like you use the word grace.
Yeah, but as far as consolation, physical, things to cling to, I don't know. I don't know, but it is a choice, and it's definitely the biggest motivator, recognizing that we could meet our son one day. It's definitely worth doing our best here and trusting that it's all real,
Well, yeah.
A magical thought that is,
Well, it's so easy to get, lost in. Yeah, this was what 2.5 years ago, and 3 years ago now.
It's amazing.
That's what's crazy.
By the way, they've since had 2 other little boys.
Right.
Your life, I mean, even though you have the bandwidth, you're like, man, I don't know what I ate at noon today for lunch, but less what I was contemplating 2.5 years ago. But wow. Tell me about one thing you said, Cameron, when I was talking about this a while back. You were talking about, the strain on a marriage and losing a child. How did you guys? Was there any strain, or how did you mourn his loss and work through it, and then move forward courageously to having another child? Then of course, it's just tough to be human. We got to work. It's just tough to live, But how was that for your marriage, as from your perspective?
Well, I think by the grace of God, again, it strengthened it, and somehow, I guess I don't remember personally being overly intentional about, how we went about things. I just remember clinging to each other, because it's kind of all, realizing again, that's kind of all we had in this life, was each other, and then Gabe. And it was a pretty dark time, especially going into the winter, after losing him in September, and cold and dark, I mean, spiritually, physically, it all felt that way. So we were able to, bundle up inside and be able to kind of hold on to each other for a few months and try to get through it, and I think it just as easily could have gone the other direction, but I think by the grace of God, we've had the strength to be able to lean on each other through it and grow through it.
And you wrote, I read through a good deal of your blog, which is called Life, Love, Loss, and Clark Job, a WordPress site. But you used that phrase that Cameron just used, cling to one another. Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you, like, from, a couple out there that might be listening, that just maybe in the early stages of confronting something of this order, what would you say to them?
Well, I think it's good to remember that you are two different people and that you do or will mourn differently, you know? And so I would say Cameron was very good at that. He knew himself, and he knew that, his first inclination was sort of to become numb and not be there, and yet he knew that about himself and chose the opposite because he knew that he needed to be present, whether it was for me or just for his own heart, dealing with the issue right then and there. I am grateful to that because he could have easily gone the other way in that sense. Mm-hmm. But to appreciate each other's differences, but also to appreciate that one person that can relate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's my teammate in suffering because he lost my son. We have that unity.
The bond is like
And also, it's humbling creating a child that is not perfect, So again, our marriage is not perfect, but we've given it our all, and we come out the other side, I think, stronger and much less barriers. I mean, everything we do is a team. You
guys are.
Thanks to that.
You have a great team vibe, and all the different things you take on together, it seems, in life, different outreaches and
so again, clinging to each other, because it would be easy to cling to yourself and your own hurt, or easier to cling to, I don't really know, because I've really only clung to my husband and God, because thankfully. But it would probably be easy to cling to alcohol, or to cling to a friend that talks to you better, or something. But in marriage, it's so hard to.
You have to. I don't know if there's a formula for this, but one of our guests, he mentioned the similar thing. He's like, to allow one another to respect that you're going to process it differently, like the mourning, and then and you're saying, and simultaneously lean on and cling to the dearest friend you have in all of this, outside of your faith. If there were a question, and I guess this might be just people who know you well, it might be family or close friends. If there were a question like, oh wow, Matt, let's say, Matt, you're going to interview Cameron and Genavive. If you really want to get to know them and how they tick, be sure to ask them about blank, or you'd want to ask them about blank. It could be something. What comes to your mind? It could be something. If you want to really understand them, ask them about blank. And I'm sure each of you had something come to mind. Maybe you think, oh, that can't be. Whatever. What came to your mind just then?
About what to ask us about in order to get to know us?
Like say I'm talking to somebody and they're like, oh, Genavive and Cameron Edman, you're going to interview them about, Clark Job and these kind of things.
Yeah.
If you really want to understand this couple or know them, be sure to ask them about what comes to your mind.
Do you have anything? Are you waiting for me? Well, ironically for me,
the hilarious time you danced at your wedding or something like that.
We're not that exciting.
You don't have some epic humorous.
I was going to say, like, ironically, getting to talk about our son is kind of how you'll get to know us, because it's like it's where the rubber meets the road, and it's why we want to be as real as we can with people, because death is kind of on our hearts all the time, And so in that sense, we do our best to just appreciate everything as much as we can and every human being and like what a gift it is just to be here right now. But we've also got a little bit of a perspective where like 1 foot in heaven, 1 foot on earth, I would say, where, you know, it's probably hard to get to know us in that way because we're still learning how to live this life, you know, while being very pierced to be in heaven. Because once it becomes so real,
you kind
to
of yearn for.
You just want to be there.
You yearn for.
Yeah.
You yearn for God. Yeah.
Yeah. You yearn for full communion in that sense, but we also are very, you know, desiring of bringing everyone with us and desiring of raising our kids and, you know, just that communion someday.
Yeah. We kind of became old souls, I think, through this. As now 26 and 30, it feels more like 10, 20 years older than that, because I think, I guess my perspective, it would be what we would get to know us best is to sit down something like this, really, and to talk about things that matter outside of what we're doing every day, you know, like what really matters, where we're really going, what's really happening in life, and sitting down with like a drink
glass in hand.
just talking, you know. We've got several sets of friends, including you guys, you know, that we just sit down and we just talk, and it's like that's really what fires us up, because, you know, there are times we just go through interactions with friends or family or just strangers, and it's like it seems so shallow, you know, it seems so like temporal based, and I think our eyes have been opened slightly to the fact that we need to be, I think, embracing more of the other side of things beyond the veil, and I think that's what's bringing to know us better.
You know, it's interesting. I read Padre Pio. I just love reading about him, and for listeners, he's a saint in the Catholic Church, died in 1968. So there's like letters you can read about. But one thing that really pained him was being around idle conversation too long. Like he, you know, and
small talk.
Yeah, like it would just, and I don't think there's a judgment there. I mean, geez, you know, we got, business has to happen, school life happens, right? And it's social cordiality and all that stuff. But in a way, in answer to my original question, it's almost like you're saying, well, if you want to get to know what's most dear to us, you'd have to talk about this.
Yeah, honestly.
Like, I mean, not every day. I mean, I've laughed with, we did not talk about this, but we did talk about, Cameron and I have participated in the same men's group, and then, you know, faith related stuff, but it's just laughing and kids. But that's the answer in a way. If you want to know if you really want to know us. Mm-hmm.
That's definitely the answer. And as far as the fun side, I mean, we love to hike. Because
your hobbies.
I'd say hiking is.
You're both athletes too. Let's start there. You're both. That's kind of cool. They're a good-looking athletic couple here, folks.
My claim to fame for her is that she was 6 months pregnant with Gabe, and she still shot at 75. 74.
Oh, you golf?
Yeah, I played college golf, and he played college and professional
at Gonzaga
baseball.
University. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're ranked number 1 for our listeners right now.
In basketball.
They beat Duke not too long ago. In basketball. But go Zags. Anyway, we'll go back. But yeah, so you're an athletic couple. At least you seem to love, I mean, you're busy with 3 little ones, but hiking, getting outside. Yeah, that is athletic.
Yeah.
I envy your young stamina. That's great. Any other, well, let's wrap up with this question. I don't know. Again, I don't know what pattern this podcast is Heroic's going to follow, because we have just guests of different stripes and faiths and orientations. But one thing I like to do is ask people, really, if you could picture somebody facing what you're facing, and without knowing someone personally, to give advice is sort of very presumptuous. Mm-hmm. So maybe in the context of like what you found most helpful, but in retrospect, in a way, I think we've already spoken to it, but what would you advise, what would you say is most essential for a person who's facing the loss of a loved one in a tragic way in particular? Mm-hmm. Like before, well, tragedy is like, you know, losing something out of the natural order, I think you said, Cameron. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for a couple? Because I think this might appeal to couples, this podcast, this particular episode, but do you have any advice for a couple? Little tips that you maybe didn't mention or cover?
Well, I think something like this, like, naturally makes you think and makes you, you know, dive deeper and ask questions. And I think that shouldn't be denied. I guess, I mean, my opinion is to allow yourself to go places as long as there's a purpose to it, like
to doubt and wrestle with things like,
like we still do, it's, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing as long as, there's a direction to it and it's not just continuous doubt or continuous complaint, but like more of a truth seeking, faith seeking sense of doubt to where it can kind of enrich your experience, I guess.
Wow. Yeah.
We've honestly kind of always continued to, because this was 3.5 years ago, that we find out, we've always kind of made it our prayer, though, that we still stay pierced to love like this and to have our faith like this, to rely on God like this, because there's nothing like tragedy to make you realize how little control you have on things, and that is in itself shocking and can be brutal if you're a control freak. So again, I just would say that finding meaning in what you're going through, sometimes that doesn't come fast.
Yeah, there's a real, I'm reminded the scripture, like you have to wrestle with, don't be afraid. People can have a sort of fixed, you're young, you had a certain orientation, like buppity, and this happens. And it could be scary to walk off the plank into the unknown.
Yeah.
Feel like you're losing all your supports, question your faith, question things.
Yeah.
So it's like have the courage to bear with the uncertainty in a way, you're saying, like the.
Yeah, and I guess love has been the biggest motivator, the biggest glue, I would say, for our family and for friends and everything else, is just to keep loving. And again, when someone is losing, a child or someone that they hold dear, a lot of times loving that person or loving their memory is what inspires, the good things that happen later, the motivation to start a foundation or to
loving their memory. Yeah. One of our speakers said a friend of his son went through a whole cancer process, and he recovered, but then he got a terminal diagnosis. And a friend of his who also his child had pediatric cancer. He's like, "What are you going to remember most?" And he said that one question somehow just pierced, and he decided to love every bit of it, like every pain, to love the memory of it. It was interesting the way you.
Yeah. We have that in common.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that's the biggest challenge, but the best medicine is to keep loving, because it would be easy to get cold, and it's still, there are scars. I guess that's the other thing, is just like Cameron was saying, like, be real. I mean, you do have to be honest about, yes, this was beautiful and brutal at the same time, and so many good things have happened, but a lot of bad things, remain this side of heaven. And so just being real about that.
Yeah, this domain is it's not without its crosses and suffering and it's a lonely road. I would recommend for couples especially to try to find friends that have a similar loss or something, because it is some sort of
lonely
support group that has that understanding, and I would imagine it'd be very lonely. Yeah. In today's world, a lot of people with unusual diagnosis, they'll find people from different parts of the world and grow very close.
Yeah. It's amazing. So it's good that's an option.
Well, thank you so much, both of you.
Yeah.
It was really,
Well, I don't know if you mentioned it before, but we appreciate it because that was the chair. Because that we don't, life gets so crazy, we don't really get to think or talk about them as much as we'd like to, So this is when you initially asked us, we're like, we'd love to just, just sit down, and like you said, we get to talk
I was
to
just
them,
thinking today, the modern world's crazy. I mean, like, I'll give you a copy of this recording and stuff, but like, if I were your son, 5-year-old Gabriel or something, I'd want to know, like, when I'm 30, I'd want to listen to this. Like, I'd want to go, how did they talk about this? Like, what was that like for them?
Yeah.
Once he gets through the narcissism of youth and everything.
Right.
So, no, he's a beautiful.
Thank you for thinking up this kind of show, because
I've been bragging out to everybody I talk to, saying what an inspiration it can be for people. So
thanks, Cameron.
Hopefully it, definitely.
Oh, it's totally I love it. There's nothing. When I used to work as a therapist, I'd say there's no greater privilege than sitting down and talking to people about these sorts of things. Like what's most terrifying, shameful, and then where do they find hope? What's most dear to them? I just think it's a privilege. So thank you. And you're friends of mine, so thank you. Thank you. So,
yeah.
All right, guys.
Cool.
All right, God bless.